This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. You're in luck because this is the very best show we're going to do today. Here's what we got for y'all. Homeless shelters and food distribution centers are working through challenges as demand increases during the winter months. We'll tell you how they plan to keep people safe. Plus, social media companies are weighing how to combat misinformation about COVID vaccines. We spoke to experts about the effectiveness of those measures. But first, here's what you need to know right now. Some big news tonight in the path to a vaccine rollout in the US as a key government panel endorsed the COVID-19 vaccine candidate from Pfizer. This is the same vaccine already approved for use in Canada and the UK. The panel's vote paves the way for approval from the Food and Drug Administration, now expected within the next few days. That approval would officially start the vaccine rollout process. Healthcare workers and nursing home residents would be first in line for a vaccine over the next few weeks, while the public at large likely wouldn't get a dose until the spring. COVID-19 related deaths now average more than 3,000 people a day in the US. That's an unprecedented number since the pandemic began. And with hospitalizations and cases continuing to rise, these numbers aren't likely to dip down in the coming weeks.
You don't want to overwhelm the general public, but you want them to at least understand that you're dealing with real suffering and real disease and real loss in the form of death of loved ones. That's where we are right now. We can't walk away from that problem.
And as the number of COVID cases rise, unemployment numbers are back up too. There were more than 850,000 new jobless claims this week. That's the most since September. This comes as many states put in place more restrictions on businesses with the aim of stopping COVID cases and deaths from spiraling even higher. But notably, jobless claims also went up in states that did not impose stricter rules. One especially pressing issue here, there are 19 million people in the US right now who are dependent on some kind of unemployment benefit, and federal benefits could expire at the end of 2020 if Congress doesn't pass new relief.
We cannot leave here without having a piece of legislation.
Lawmakers on Capitol Hill are still negotiating a roughly $900 billion relief package. That could include unemployment benefits for self-employed people and contract workers, and an extension of benefits for an additional 13 weeks. If it's passed, it would help keep about 9 million unemployed Americans from deeper financial distress. We're getting a clearer picture of what the future Biden administration could look like. President-elect Joe Biden is filling out more of his planned cabinet for the White House, with nominations announced for top positions, including Tom Vilsack for agriculture, Dennis McDonough for Veterans Affairs, and Susan Rice for domestic policy. And by the way, all of those folks were prominent members of the Obama administration. We're sensing a trend here. Keep in mind, most of these nominations will require confirmation by the Senate, and some key GOP members are refusing to commit to hold hearings or votes, while challenges to election results are still in play. Historically, a majority of a president's nominees have received hearings before inauguration so that an administration is ready to go to work on day one. But, don't put money on that happening this time around. Homelessness has increased in many places this year because of the pandemic and how it's affected our economy. At the same time, many homeless shelters have had to reduce the number of people they can safely accommodate. Now, going into the winter months, homeless shelters are going to face another challenge: preparing for increased demand while staving off coronavirus outbreaks that have affected other shelters over the past few weeks. Newsy's Amber Strong breaks down what shelters and food distribution centers are doing to keep people safe this winter.
The food pantry opens at 9:30. At 9 o'clock, there was already a line.
About 300 people a week are showing up at Streetlight Ministries in Virginia for groceries. The number of people in need of shelter here has also increased, a mix of old and new faces, many working professionals.
They have never faced the threat of homelessness, and it's very traumatizing.
The team at Streetlight Ministries say they've been working hard to keep COVID-19 out as the number of people looking to get in grows.
In the nation's capital, D.C. Central Kitchen is busier than ever.
We're doing well over 10,000 meals a day. Part of those meals includes grocery bags, which is something we hadn't done before.
Still, CEO Mike Curtin says the fear of catching COVID-19 is keeping some away.
It's going to be harder and harder to bring them in. And I think we all really need to be aware of that and do what we can because this is going to be a tough few months ahead of us.
On top of a growing crisis around food insecurity, Newsy's tracked COVID-19 outbreaks in homeless shelters across 4 states.
They did some obvious things like mandating mask wearing, having testing readily available, emphasizing hand washing.
Giles Bruce has been covering the homeless crisis for Kaiser Health News.
Chicago, for example, is using abandoned schools. The largest shelter in Fargo, North Dakota, which has an average high temperature in January of 18 degrees, is utilizing an insulated, heated warehouse.
But even with the alternative spaces, the outbreaks are still happening. Some shelters are using money from the CARES Act to provide things like hotels for at-risk clients or clients recovering from COVID-19. However, a number of states have not used the funds allocated from Congress and are quickly approaching a December 30th deadline when provisions from the original legislation expire.
Some in Congress are negotiating extensions to relief legislation to give states more time to get funds into the hands of those who need it. That's something shelters like this say is vital as winter approaches. Amber Strong, Newsy, just outside Washington.
The Pied Piper of Quarantine Feels decided Your Tears for her first album just weren't enough and is requesting another offering.
Newsy cuts through.
There haven't been many galvanizing forces this year, things on which we can all truly agree. Luckily, Time magazine delivered something that we can all be pissed off about together. Here's what's trending. Time magazine has announced its finalists for Person of the Year. According to Time, it's given to the person who affected the news or our lives the most, for better or for worse. Here's the short list. President-elect Joe Biden. This is kind of an obvious one. He won what would definitely go down as a historic election, earning the record for most votes ever cast. President Donald Trump, a previous winner, also made the cut for his undeniable influence on the year, from election claims to the handling of the coronavirus in the US. Dr. Anthony Fauci and frontline healthcare workers are being considered for the pivotal roles they played during the pandemic. Shout out to healthcare workers for the risks they expose themselves to every day to save lives, and Fauci for being the most valuable broken record throughout this entire pandemic. And lastly, not a person, but the movement for racial justice that reignited after the killing of George Floyd. The fight for racial justice and against systemic discrimination caught on across the world during the pandemic. Of course, not everybody is happy with the picks. Granted, Time has weathered plenty of other controversies in the past. After all, Adolf Hitler, Ayatollah Khomeini, and Joseph Stalin, those are all people who have previously been named Person of the Year. Time has to underline that whole greatest influence for better or worse stipulation every single year. Also, it could have been worse, y'all. Time has named inanimate objects as the Person of the Year before. I'm just glad the actual coronavirus wasn't a finalist. Taylor Swift unexpectedly announced Evermore, a surprise quarantine album set to release tonight at midnight. And no, this isn't Deja Vu. Can you tell an actual fan helps put this show together every night? This is Swift's second album to come out during the pandemic and her 9th overall. Swift said in a tweet that she and her fellow collaborators just couldn't stop writing songs. Evermore will be the sister album to Folklore, which came out back in July. Haim, The National, and Bon Iver are all featured on the album. Of course, Swift had a special reason for choosing this release date. Writing, ever since I was 13, I've been excited about turning 31 because it's my lucky number backwards. She told fans this year she wanted to give them something for her birthday on the 13th. It's the feels. That's what she wanted to give y'all, the feels. At this point, it might be easier to name the people who aren't in the upcoming Spider-Man movie. News was like this week with a number of actors from previous Spider-Man movies, Spider-Man, Spiders-Man, reprising their roles in an upcoming Spider-Man movie starring current web-slinger Tom Holland. To recap, Alfred Molina is returning as Dr. Octopus, a throwback to the absolutely iconic Spider-Man 2. And Jamie Foxx is on board as Electro, a throwback from the amazing Spider-Man 2. This is going to get confusing. Kirsten Dunst is also reportedly coming back as Mary Jane Watson from the original trilogy. The real kicker though, former Spider-Men Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire are also reportedly in the mix, which will give us a confusing number of Spider people. This has launched theories about the upcoming movie, including the Sinister Six, a group of supervillain baddies who don't like spiders. Another theory, Emma Stone could make an appearance as Spider-Gwen, a character we saw in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Hey guys.
Of course, I need to temper the excitement here. Very little has been confirmed, and a good bit of it would involve either some multiverse madness or just forgetting everything that happened before Tom Holland suited up, which is unlikely. Good news, we only have to wait a year and some change to see what happens. Sony is planning to release the upcoming Spider-Man sequel December 17th of 2021. Also, here's a poster from the upcoming film. Clearly that ain't it, but you were thinking it too, right? Misinformation is like kudzu. Y'all know what I'm talking about. It just smothers everything and is everywhere. And maybe you've seen some of it. People just asking a question about the vaccine that's really informed by conspiracy theories. That's something social media companies are having to contend with as we get near vaccine approval and distribution. Newsy's Tyler Adkison spoke to experts about whether measures taken by social media companies will actually have an effect.
Health and misinformation experts tell Newsy they anticipate a new wave of misinformation with upcoming COVID-19 vaccine rollouts.
There's already mistrust about this because of the perception of rushing things, trying to get things out, and not knowing really who to trust.
Facebook has really been a hub for a lot of vaccine-opposed, anti-vaccine related communities, particularly because of the use of private groups. The uniqueness of being able to facilitate a certain community, to be able to talk to people in a private space is what really lent Facebook to be so successful.
Newsy reached out to Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter about new policies to deal with COVID-19 vaccine misinformation. A Twitter spokesperson told us the site is still working through our policy and product plans in advance of the introduction of a viable medically approved vaccination. Its priority now is removing COVID-19 content with potentially harmful calls to action. Facebook recently said it will start removing false claims about these vaccines that have been debunked by public health experts. YouTube's policies state it will remove videos with COVID-19 misinformation that goes against consensus from the World Health Organization or local health authorities. Experts told Newsy that some of the proactive fact-checking efforts by social media companies should be commended.
I think what we saw before with anti-vaxxer movements associated with the MMR vaccine, for example, those types of claims were typically just went unfettered, nothing whatsoever to debunk. And now you're seeing on social media not only debunking, but getting out in front of potential misinformation that may arise.
I think it's been really useful in the last few months to see social media companies beginning to label information as factually untrue or to suggest that there's other sources of information.
But even if the biggest social media companies use robust artificial intelligence and widespread fact-checking to identify harmful COVID-19 misinformation, users may still find ways to post or share it.
When Facebook a few years ago started to put down more restrictions in the way that anti-vaccine related content was being shared on the platform, one thing that users started doing is not spelling out the word vaccine. They started adopting new terminology. So anything from like X-vaxxer instead of anti-vaxxer, or we're talking about medical freedom. And so these are terms that are then harder to just monitor because you don't want to say like, oh, I'm against medical freedom.
In order to effectively combat COVID-19 vaccine misinformation, research shows social media needs to be hawkish in actioning content.
What Facebook and other platforms need to be doing is really actively monitoring in the same way that they monitored for election misinformation, vaccine-related misinformation. Misinformation can happen very quickly, and then after it spreads, even if you take it down like the next day, the damage from that misinformation can already be done.
Tyler Adkison, Newsy, Chicago.
When you're back, we'll tell you about the not-so-warm reception for the Selena series on Netflix. This year's offerings from streaming platforms have been a godsend. In a year full of less than ideal news, there's always been something to look forward to, like Netflix's Selena, the series, based on the Tejano musician of the same name. But as Newsy's Casey Mendoza reports, criticism of the series threw some cold water on all that excitement of introducing this 90s star to a new audience.
If we go out there and give it everything that we've got, we can make this happen, now or never.
The first season of Netflix's highly anticipated Selena the series about the Tejano musician Selena Quintanilla, who was murdered in 1995, is holding steadily as Netflix's top title in the US. Released last week, the biopic was produced by the Quintanilla family and has been praised for being both Latino-led and Latino-created.
1, 2, 3.
But amid the buzz is both criticism from longtime fans of the artist and a conversation about what it means to support representation in Hollywood.
I am one of the few that actually got to hear her music when she was still alive. I was about 15 when she passed.
Entertainment journalist Yolanda Machado is among several critics of Netflix's biopic. In her review for Elle, she pointed out how the musician has been sidelined as a flat supporting character without any agency over her career. Instead, the new series focuses on Abraham Quintanilla, Selena's father and manager, who co-produced the Netflix story.
I do think that this is a lost opportunity to introduce Selena to a new audience.
Similar to Machado's review, much of the criticism of the series also acknowledges the lack of representation of Latinos in the industry.
It is very hairy because as a critic, I have been met several times with other Latinos saying, well, why'd you give it a negative review? It was Latino-led or Latino-created.
If you are a young Latina, your chances of seeing another Latina that looks like you on television are very low. In fact, overall, it's just about 2.5%.
New research from Nielsen expands on this by highlighting not just the statistics of on-screen diversity, but also providing the context with which different demographics are represented.
For Latinas, these themes that they see when they see themselves on TV are dysfunction, melodramatic, emotional, and police stations. These were among the top of all the descriptors tagged to the programs where Latinos were present and Latinos were watching.
This context shows the importance of diverse storylines and non-stereotyped narratives for audiences. And for critics, it emphasizes the importance of honest and fair criticism.
We have so many stories to tell. We need to be able to criticize them fairly, to allow them, if they're not great, to say they're not great and still get a chance to create more stories, because only then are we really representative.
Selena's sister, Suzette Quintanilla, says there will be no apologies coming and describes the show as the story of a Mexican-American family who worked hard and never gave up. But ahead of part 2 of Selena the series, which will likely be released in 2021, Machado hopes the Quintanilla family listens to the criticism and brings the iconic artist back to the forefront of her story.
We love Selena. We want to see more of her, but we want to see it told from her eyes, from her perspective.
If you haven't done so already, feel free to reach out to us on Twitter using the hashtag NewsyInTheLoop. I would say holler at us on YouTube, but folks are too busy arguing with each other in the comments, so let those tweets fly. In any other year, purchasing travel insurance has likely been an afterthought for people booking getaways. Every time I've been prompted with an offer to purchase travel insurance, I've audibly yelled, "It's a scam!" But that's changing because of the anxiety around getting from point A to point B. A record amount of people are purchasing travel insurance, but do you really need it? National reporter Stephanie Stone has more.
If it's been a while since you've booked a flight, travel insurance is that thing that pops up at the end.
At the end, they're going to say, hey, this many people have bought travel insurance. Don't you want to buy travel insurance too? And, I think a lot of people generally before COVID would have just said, oh, they're trying to upsell me and move along. And what we're seeing, in fact, is that more and more people are saying, I want that insurance. I want to protect my future travel.
Michael Parrish-Dudell is the Chief Strategy Officer for CouponFollow, an online tool designed, he says, to save consumers both time and money. He says they're always asking consumers about their money and how they spend it.
So as we looked closer at how people were traveling, where they were spending their money, where they were allocating their time, what we found are these little kind of sort of niche, interesting areas.
Things like travel insurance.
We found was that 75% of the people who had already booked flights had purchased trip insurance. And that was a staggering number because that is a 55% increase than what is thought of as the norm.
So why the increase? Anxiety is likely a big part of it.
There is so much uncertainty in the world right now. And of course, that uncertainty is around the pandemic, but there's other kinds of uncertainty too. And I think people feel as though they're taking a really strong, just a risk in general when they're traveling. So if they can mitigate risk in other areas, they're willing to do that. And they're really willing to sort of spend the money behind it.
There are a lot of caveats to whether travel insurance for airline purposes makes sense right now. And frankly, because the airlines allow you to make changes without a cost and last minute, there's really almost no reason why you would get travel insurance.
That's Leslie Tane. She's a financial attorney and author and a frequent flyer. She says these days airlines are more accommodating than ever, and because there's been so much industry disruption surrounding travel, the future is being rewritten now.
I definitely believe they're going to rewrite the travel insurance. First of all, they're being investigated now. It's been taken up by members of Congress in terms of the validity of travel insurance, and there's some concern that travel insurance might be what's termed either a scam or a money-making proposition that's not really beneficial to the consumers.
So when it comes to whether you need that insurance, Tane says, weigh your risks, consider where you're going and what you'll be doing.
My recommendation would be to try to understand what the restrictions are and what you could use the insurance for. When would it apply to you?
Tane says if you're in a situation where it makes sense, don't make an insurance decision on emotion. Think of it as a business decision. And these days, we're all in the business of saving time and money. I'm Stephanie Stone, reporting.
That's it for us, gang. As always, thanks for watching. We'll be back next week for more In the Loop, same time, same place. In the meantime, take care of yourself. Top stories from Newsy are headed your way right now.